This is LASFS The Panel Continues, and I have with me author Russell Nohelty. So thanks for being here. If we could hold the side conversations or bring them out into the hall, that would be great. Thanks, guys. Okay, Russell. Well, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
Yes, it's a super big day for you because you are here to plug your Kickstarter campaign, Cthulhu is Hard to Spell, and you're still plugging it, but tell us the news.
It funded today.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy because this is the most we've ever asked for a campaign. Our previous two campaigns were $15,000 and $16,000 were asked. We ended up raising $27,000 and $25,000 for them, but we definitely did not think we were going to get to $21,666 in 10 days.
Right? I thought I was going to help you a little bit and be like, hey, back his project, which you should do.
Well, but now you're backing a real thing.
Yeah,
up until this
point.
Now
you get your product.
Right, I mean, up until this point, we had nothing.
Yeah.
And it's what's weird about Kickstarter is you go from having like play money, where it's like, oh, look, we have 20,000 nothings or 200 nothings. Like, it's nothing because Kickstarter is an all or nothing crowdfunding platform. So you either get all of it or none of it. So there's this moment in every Kickstarter campaign, you hope. And you hope it's sooner than later, where you go from having nothing to like, suddenly you're like, oh, I don't have nothing anymore. I now don't just have like 20,000 nothings. I have $22,000. Like we have the money to make the book. Whereas before that moment, it's just like, oh, this is nice. Like, oh, look, the money's going. Yeah. Like it's going up. It's look at this. There's stuff happening, and it says it's money, but it's like just ethereal money up until like that moment that it goes from. And you know, my old campaigns used to be very small. Yeah. So the first few campaigns, you know, they were a few $1,000s, and so our ask was, let's say, $3,500, and we ended up making like $5,000, which is good, but you get there much quicker. So when it's like $20,000, it's just inching and inching and inching and inching, and you know, like to put your mind around getting a deposit into your bank account for like over $20,000 in like one time is. This is now the third time I have to figure out like this thing.
Yeah,
and
that's so cool.
It is amazing because you have to call your bank and be like, I'm not a drug dealer. I did a Kickstarter, and they're expect a $20,000 thing, and they're like, okay. And sometimes they ask you to verify that, and you're like, then you do that, and you're like, here's the link.
The website. Yeah.
There's a thing. Usually they see that you've had other things from Kickstarter now, but especially that first time where you get like a big lump sum, it's just crazy. It's like crazy to think about like making more in a day than many people do in like multiple months, maybe even their entire year.
Yeah, that could be a year for some people. So congratulations, that's great. Well, tell us about the book itself and show us.
Sure. Okay, so this is a kind of crappy version of the book. So this is the soft cover proof. The thing about all of our books, and here, this is the first volume. So I actually brought a first volume for you to look through.
Ooh, great.
So that is our first book, Monsters and Other Scary, and then a bad word. I don't know if I can say the bad word here, but
I'm sure you can, but whatever.
So it was 30 stories about monsters, and you can see it was hardcover. Yeah. The cover was drawn by Aaron Alexovich. So what we just did was we raised the money to print this book like this. So this is now a continuation of our monster anthology series. This was 30 stories about monsters. This is 35 stories about Lovecraftian gods and monsters. And whenever I go to do a book, I always try and think about what I can do different than what's out there. Because let's face it, like, there are quite a few Lovecraft stories. Like, he's not an unknown commodity in the horror community.
Yeah. I think a lot of the funded projects right now in horror are Lovecraft
Yes, there's board games, there's movies,
yeah.
there's books, and
it's super popular. So
it is super popular, and it's a very easy thing to glom onto and just do what everyone else has done previously. So I wanted to kind of deconstruct what I could do differently in this book to show like my love for Lovecraft, but in my own way. And so what I did was I wanted to make a book about the gods and monsters of Lovecraft. Not the horror aspect of Lovecraft, though there's plenty of horror in the book, but I wanted to show the monsters in a way that I really haven't seen before. And that is a complete construction of Lovecraft. You know, Lovecraft didn't show his monsters. If he did, it was at the very, very end of the story, because looking upon them caused you to go crazy or explode or die. Or horrific things would happen to you if you saw the gods and monsters in his stories. And that was how he constructed it. But I've always felt that because of that, Lovecraft stories often came across as being very similar. Whereas there's a weird person in a weird town or a weird place, and weird things are happening, and then they try and figure it out, and they find some sort of cult or weird thing is happening that are trying to summon some sort of like an eldritch horror. Yeah. That's not every story, and granted that Lovecraft worked a lot with weird tales and a lot of stories, so like they wanted very similar story structure. But one thing that you don't see a lot, I'm not going to say never, but you don't see a lot outside of Nyarlathotep, is the gods and monsters. You see little bits and pieces of them being talked about. So for instance, my story is about Azathoth and the outer gods. So inside Azathoth's mind, the entire universe exists. And if he were to ever wake up, the entire universe would be blinked out of existence. And so these outer gods basically play lullabies to keep him asleep. But you never really see that. You hear. Right. You're hinted about it in many stories. And that's one of the beauties of Lovecraft, and what I love about it so much is that it leaves so much to the imagination. But that being said, it's been over 100 years. My imagination has been satiated. I want some stories with the gods and monsters of Lovecraft.
Yeah, you definitely have the monsters in there in many of the stories I've read.
Yes, so I think there's plenty of eldritch horror type stories in there. Yeah. But there's also a lot of cute stories and funny stories and whimsical stories, and just like people paying reverence to Lovecraft in their own way, because another thing that I love about Lovecraft is that people have taken his work in so many different directions. Yeah. So, there's Stephen King is influenced by Lovecraft, Aliens, In the Mouth of Madness, Event Horizon, but pretty much also my friends who do Tentacle Kitty are influenced by Lovecraft. Mm-hmm. So like that's very different from anything that's like horror or even in the horror realm. So I wanted to kind of show how Lovecraft has infused into society as a whole. And my two favorite reviews that I got for the book were, one person said, "I don't know anything about Lovecraft and I never felt left behind," which I think is important because he is not the easiest person to start reading. He's not the easiest person to understand his universe. Yeah. And it's not the easiest fandom to become a part of.
I would say that's accurate, because I know little about Lovecraft except from what I've heard or seen in movies, and I've gotten through 100 pages, and I would agree that yes.
Yay! That's really important. It's
very approachable, and you can follow along with any of these gods and get a sort of sense of the myth in the world without knowing a background.
Yeah, there's not a lot of like beginner Lovecraft stuff. Again, I'm not saying there's not any, because I'm sure somebody is typing furiously like beginner Lovecraft stuff.
Are. Good thing we can't see the comments.
Yeah, but there's not a lot. There's not a lot when someone can say, "I want to indoctrinate somebody. I want to show somebody like a beginner level Lovecraft thing. People come up to me at shows since I put this on my table or even started talking about it. It's like, what can I show my 10-year-old? Yeah. It's like, well, show them about the Lovecraft universe. They're a little too young to like follow a lot of the very dark themes of Lovecraft and his and the people that took him on. So I think that this does a good job of filling that need. But the other half of it is I've heard many people who love Lovecraft, like are deep Lovecraft heads, who said this has a lot of layers to it, and they loved it because it had so much depth from their that they hadn't seen before. So a good example of that is this cover. So this cover is multiple levels. So the first time that people look at it, they think that Lovecraft is teaching the class. The second time, they say, "Oh, Lovecraft is Cthulhu is teaching the class." And the second time, it's Cthulhu is eating the teacher. And the third time, they start seeing these different spellings of Cthulhu, and they realize that because the teacher evoked the old god's wrath by saying the name, and this is the deepest cut of the whole thing. And most people that are not deep Lovecraft heads will not get this fourth layer, which is Lovecraft never settled upon a spelling of any of his gods throughout the course of his life. So what was important was the pronunciation of the name, not the spelling of it. So the fourth layer for those people is like Cthulhu is actually incredibly easy to spell because you can literally spell it any way you want.
Oh, okay.
What is important is the pronunciation when you evoke his name. So that comes all the way back from like the name being funny to the name having like 4 layers of meaning, which I think is kind of indicative of the whole book of like, it just looks like this cute, funny, silly book, but there's all sorts of really like deep stories in there, including some where we actually like brought our own Lovecraftian god into this that has never been there before. And it's very funny when people talk about this in reviews because it's like a very inside, it's like nobody knows except for us who or very, very astute Lovecraft people will know that this one god does not exist outside of this world. But it shows a lot of what the people who came after Lovecraft built upon his legacy and added to his lore, added their own monsters, their own takes on it.
You said there are 35 artists?
35? No, there's 70 artists. There's 35 stories.
Okay, 35 stories.
And that 70 includes me and the cover artist Aaron Alexovich and Dirk Manning, who wrote the foreword.
Right. So how did you, find 70 different artists who love Lovecraft and do comics, and then how did you shape it into like this story? Does make sense if you're reading through, and
how did
you go about this process?
So this is a deep cut. So this is like I hope this doesn't get too boring or technical for the people that are in this room. I'm going to assume there's a lot of writers in here. So the way I compile an anthology is kind of like compiling a mixtape. So I want stories that are short, that are long, that are dark, that are funny, that are realistically drawn, that are cartoonishly drawn, and I want to layer them around each other to evoke the kind of emotion that you would if you were listening to an amazing mixtape, and to make sure that just like how a 3-act structure or a book kind of like has these dips and valleys, that so does the anthology as a whole. And now I did this, I think, pretty well with the first anthology that we did, but the book was the stories were 1 to 15 pages long, which was just too short and too long. Well, what I found was 8 pages was about the range of someone could read even something they don't like and get through it. Because and for something they do love, it's just enough for them to want more. without them like having they want like they're fervent for more stuff, which is what you want. Like you want them to end and be like, I have to have more, and then go search for the people who are in the anthology, because then the people who are the creators are then getting the promotion that they really deserve. Of like, so 15 pages was too long. 1 page was too short, but like 2, 4, 6, or 8 pages, it seemed like people liked even number pages, and they liked little quick hits, and they liked a few quick hits and a few long stories, but mostly they wanted 4 to 6 pages. And so a lot of people had seen the success. Mm-hmm. I mean, the first book was an invite book, so I invited all the creators.
Yeah.
Then it was successful, and it made this book much easier to do. Cool. So I don't know how would go about constructing this from scratch. What I did was I had so many creator friends that I was able to invite this anthology, and then we crushed this anthology and made $27,000 on it. And so everyone wanted to be in this anthology. Not many people wanted to be in this anthology, though there are 224 pages and 30 stories. You know, I probably went out to a couple of hundred creators to get those 30 stories in. We actually, I think, had 350 or 400, some huge amount of pages committed, and then only 219, I think, actually came through. So that shows you kind of like how people thought of like people did not think super highly of like this anthology when they were in it. When I was starting this process, because they thought it would be like any other anthology, which would. There's some flaws in the anthology concept. The number one of which, when I join an anthology, I expect to meet the other creators and then get some promotion. But the number one thing that I want is to meet the other creators who are involved. And I've been in a lot of anthologies, and most of them I never even know who the other creators are until the day the anthology launches on Kickstarter, or maybe a week before. So one of the things that we did was we created a Facebook group where all the people are in there. So like it became more than just an anthology. It became a community of people. And the second thing we did was like, we kick butt with this anthology. Like we've almost run out of we've only got about 300 copies of this book left in a year. So we've run out of, 1,700, I think, copies. We got 2,000 in a year. So like, and the third thing is like, people, I mean, they're not making a lot of money, but they get paid quarterly on this. So like they keep getting paid and they can buy it for cheap. So like there's just a lot of goodwill in this anthology that once this one opened, people were like, well, I love Lovecraft and I think this is going to be awesome. And I want in because of me personally and how I make books. I mean, I have no shortage of amazing books that I've done. And then just the community atmosphere of it all, where like it was almost became a brand this year where people were like going around tables at shows and like seeing this everywhere, and like it became like a kind of, oh, you're from Wannabe Press, and people like would you are in this anthology, and people would stop and like talk to them.
Yeah, it's interesting not to have the title on the cover. You know, it's very recognizable, but yeah, I kind of think it makes it stand out a little bit more.
Well, so I will say the one thing about this anthology was the cover was the hardest part of the whole thing. Because it's called Monsters and Other Scary Shit. And I was like, how do you make a cover for that? And then I was at the Broad, and I walked up the escalator up to the top floor. And at the time, I don't know if they have it anymore, they had this mural called Hustle and Punch by KK and Kiki. And it was just this thousands of faces of like weird faces. And I took a picture of it and I messaged it to Aaron Alexevich, who's the cover artist. I was like, can you just do this? And then he sent it to me, and I was like, well, this is awesome. like, where do you put the title? Like, where do you put the title on this? Like, you don't. You just
You
don't put it anywhere. There's like no good place to put the title. And so I was like, well, I guess I'm not putting a title on that book.
That's super cool.
And everyone said that I was crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, the other reason I did it was because I didn't want to have shit on the cover of 2 of my books, because one of them already is not all ages appropriate. So I didn't want to have 2 that I would have to hide at shows. But it became kind of this iconic image for us. And I mean, I have written a course on how to make this anthology.
Yeah.
So I think...
So we're not going to go into all of it.
No, but I mean... I say that because I think that I have now over 2 kind of nailed why this one was successful, because, you know, one of the problems with creative people and creative things is it's very hard to dissect why something was successful, right? Like you can, like even a big movie, it's like, why was Blair Witch Project successful? Like they say it's the marketing, but like, sure, but you know, there's probably other things that could have been marketed exactly the same way, but not hit.
Yeah.
So, it's really hard with anything to say like where the success comes from. But you know, for me, the other thing is this is complete fan service. So like, I do love Lovecraft, but like, if you look at my other work, I don't tend to use public domain characters. And so when we did the Monster Anthology, it became like a way to geek out with our fans. And like, I asked them what they loved, who I should get for a cover artist. I asked them all these questions. And then like a year later, I was like, remember that thing? Mm-hmm. Here, I made it. You want it now? And everyone's like, yes, I did. And then I did the same thing with this. And I was like, cool, we're going to do another one. Like, what do you think? Like, and they were like, they told me they didn't like the pages as long as it was, that they wanted full color, that they wanted all ages, that they wanted Lovecraft, that they wanted Aaron to come back. And I was like, hey, made it. You want it? And they were like, how did you know? How did you know? It's like, because you told me.
Yeah.
Business is very simple. I ask people what they want, and then I do that.
Well, that is such a strange approach, Russell. I mean, the rest of us artists were just, you know, pulling something out of the air and then saying, you want this? You want this? And then, no, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do. I
mean, I will say that it helps to have a rather large audience. I've been blessed with a rather large audience, and I've been blessed with the ability to make money, a lot of money at shows, which allows me to connect one-on-one with audience members and even people who don't buy your books who may be interested. We end up at least being able to have a nice dialogue with them, and I've been able to develop a very nice community over the years of people who love our work. But the first books, I just kind of did that same thing, like pulling out of the ether. You know, like Ichabod Jones' Monster Hunter came from my head. Katrina Hates Dead Shit came from my head. And they just happened to, like, connect with a similar audience. Yeah. And then My Father Didn't Kill Himself, that also came from my head. But once you get a little bit of an audience, it's kind of silly if you don't ask them, like, why do you like my work? Not even, like, what you like. It's like, why do you like my work? Like, what is it about it that like resonates with you? So I can try and, you know, maybe I won't do it, but at least I'll know.
Right.
You know, we were talking before about this big series that I'm planning, this like big overarching like signature 10-book series, which is not a thing that I do. As you know, I don't do long series. And it all came from like, well, they like fairy tales and Lovecraft, and part of Lovecraft that I like is this one part of Lovecraft that is never explored. And like they liked Ichabod Jones because of the psychological nature of never knowing what the truth was. And I was like, I can just take all of this stuff, cut the parts that I love that maybe they don't love, and make something like that we can both grok out on together instead of just me grokking out. And still, like, I mean, we're pretty decently close friends as far as like the internets go. Yes. And like, I was like freaking out, even though I made this thing, and I was like, I don't know if anyone's gonna like it, and everyone was like, you're gonna like it, it's amazing. And I was like, everyone was like, you're gonna hit like immediately, and I was like, but I don't know.
The nerves still hit you no matter what.
They do, because you're, especially when you're,
put a lot on the line when you're asking for $21,000.
you do.
And
it's so much.
It's very scary.
It's a lot. So I did this Kickstarter that was $1. It was a $1 goal. And it was the only campaign that I never freaked out about because I didn't care. I already had it. I was already like about to publish it anyway.
Okay.
And I was
met
like,
your goal.
I met the goal in like
good job.
5 minutes. And our goal was like, can we get 1,000,000% funded? And I think we got $330. We got to like $3,400. Okay. But it's like I never had to worry in that campaign because I was like funded in the first minute.
Right.
Or maybe 2 minutes. But when you're doing
interesting.
$20,000 campaign, it's a lot of money. It's just so much. It's like a mind-boggling amount of money, considering that like some years of my life, that was the amount of money that I had. Multiple years of my life, that was the more than I made in the entire year. Was
I've been there.
Like not even like 1 or 2 years, like many years, like back to back, I had made the amount of money that I just have now cleared.
Yeah.
And it's an insane thing to think about. I mean, but it is easier when you have done it before and you're like, this is the path. Okay, I've done it, and I can now cross, and I can go back and figure out why I did it and then try and replicate it.
I mean, how many years have you been doing this? Because you have such a lot of work. And
2010, I started writing my first graphic novel.
Yeah.
2006, I started writing like seriously, like full time.
Yeah.
Like a crazy amount. But books started coming out in 2014. So I don't know when starting is.
Sure.
At some time between 2006 and September of 2014 is when I started. But, when I was younger, much younger, the people always told me that if you want to be successful, your first 10 things are going to suck. So my goal was then to write 10 things as fast as humanly possible because I wanted to suck for as short amount of time as possible. And by the time that I had written 10 or 15 scripts in the first year, it just kind of became a habit of I'm just writing now all of the time. And when sometimes it was adapting. And then I got into comics, and those were way cheaper than making movies. And
because originally, and I don't think you don't talk about it much, but you originally wanted to do director of photography. You were in the movie business.
I was a fashion photographer for a while. I was a director of photography for a while. I've directed and produced and written a movie. Yeah. A couple of shorts, a web series, a green screen web series, which will never come out.
I have those.
Well, I mean, it's not like series. It's just we're never going to pay for the special. The producer is never going to pay for the special effects to do the green screen. Yeah. So I guess it could come out as it's against the literal green screen, but until someone actually
release it and your audience can do what they want with the green screen.
Yes, exactly.
It'll be the Shia LaBeouf.
But all of those things happened while I was doing this stuff.
Wow.
But then novels were a way for me to translate some of my better TV concepts into books and become sort of a transmedia kind of person. And then by the time I finished my third book, I just became kind of a book writing human. And I don't know, it's just I kept doing it. And eventually you build up this catalog that is rather impressive. Yeah. I mean, I was I did a signing next to Larry Niven a couple of years ago, and he's got a ton of books. He's also got a long and storied career of putting out tons of products. And I asked him, I was like, how did you you do it? He's like, I don't know. I just kept writing things, writing stuff. And like, is
that true, Larry?
Yeah, he did. It was at LASFS.
Yeah.
3 at a time.
Yeah, it was at LASFS. I did
Cool.
2016 maybe. I did a signing next to him, next to you, and I was like, "There's so much work. How is?" He's like, "I don't know. I just kept putting stuff out, and eventually it was a lot.
Yeah.
And then it was more.
It adds up, and if you do it right, it doesn't go away.
Right, exactly.
If you stay in print with everything, that's a huge backlog.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Autograph lines get scary.
Yeah, I was next to you at LASFS. I remember people were. I had like one person. I had someone came by and Larry's line was very long. They were like, "What do
That
you
happens
do?"
all the
They're like, "What do
time.
you do?" And I was like, "I wrote this book called Spaceship Broken and needs repairs." And they're like, "All right, I'll try it." I was like,
That's good.
"Cool."
You got the trickle.
So you get the trickle next
Yeah.
to. But yeah, I mean, I think you just then it builds up and builds up and builds up. I mean, for me, that first book took me a year. The second book I did in a year. The third book it took me a year. This book then took me 2 weeks, and then I was able
crazy.
to like figure out how to write just faster because I had all the mechanics were in my head,
Yeah.
and it was putting all the pieces in the right order. And then the anthology came out because I had a year and a half to go on this production of this book.
And it takes so long because of working with artists
Right. Yeah,
and
exactly.
delays. And...
For sure. So
Yeah.
we started in 2016, and at the same time, I hadn't put out a comic in a while. And I was like, well, I could maybe do an anthology. That sounds like a pretty good idea to do an anthology. And then and it could be like a thing that my fans, I'll just ask them what they want, and then I'll just do that. And then because it worked, it was able to do another one, and then that funded other projects. But I mean, most of the reason why it feels like I'm so prolific now is because I spent 8 years building up that prolificness. So there's just so much stuff. Like next year, I'm releasing 18 novels, but I've been writing them for the last year and a half.
So you wrote 18 novels in a year and a half. Oh, that's so long. You've put in so much time.
Well, but that came from 7 years of making stuff quite slowly. And, my first scripts took me months. I remember being excited when I would do 5 movie pages in a day, which for people that are listening, that's not a lot of words. It's like maybe 3 scenes of word, maybe 5 scenes of 100 words each scene. So it's like I used to be excited at 500 words in a day, and now I get bummed if I don't do 5,000 words in a day. But that is built up over a decade. I always tell people, you can't let Larry Niven, I can't compare myself now to you after your career, after a long and storied career. I can't compare myself to Chuck Palahniuk or Piers Anthony or Robert Jordan. I can only compare myself to me now, and where I can get to and how I can get there in a shorter amount of time. But you're just gonna kill yourself, not actually kill, but you're going to work yourself into the ground, being how am I going to get 50 novels written in the next year? How am I going to get to that level? And the truth is that level comes from stepping up to the next level. And you look back and you're like, I have 4 graphic novels out now.
Okay, so how do you start getting on that level? You're just saying start slowly and...
I think that the best advice is usually the advice that I would have punched myself in the face for when I heard it. I heard all of this advice I'm about to say, and when I heard it, I was like, you son of a jerk. You're just giving me the luff off. Fine, I'll go away. Yeah. But it's very true when you're on the other side of that pail where it's your book sucks. Your first book sucks. It's so bad. Your second book is not much better. Your third thing is not much better. And then eventually you get to a point where the thing that's in your head is a thing that you can actually get on paper, and you stop hating it. And I think the thing that you can do is write in genres you don't like. Write projects you don't think you will like, that you are not attached to. Because if you do that, if you write things that you love, that you're attached to, you're going to spend time revising it, rewriting it, and remaking it instead of making something else. And one thing that ended up being a blessing for me when I first started writing was I wrote mystery, I wrote thriller, I wrote romance, I wrote everything, things that I didn't even know, because I didn't know what I liked. And it ended up that like I fell into this kind of like dark fantasy, psychological thriller, also with comedy in it, thing that I do now, mostly because I pulled from all of these other genres that I did not think that I was going to like, or that I didn't know that I was going to like. But what ends up happening is people say, I want to be Anne McCaffrey, so I'm going to write Anne McCaffrey books all day, every day. And then they read an Anne McCaffrey book and they read their book and they're like, this sucks. I can't, like, I'm the worst human ever. And I'm like, yes, that's 30 years, 40 years of her writing, of like, you can't expect, like the expectation is built up that you're just going to emerge as this amazing writer. Yeah. The other thing that you can do is write shorter pieces and just finish things. Like the amount of success that I have had, which is based almost entirely on just showing up to a place, is incredible. Like, you just show up to a place over and over and over again. You just finish story 1, and then story 2, and then story 3, and then story 5, and then story 50. But the amount of success that I have had by just literally showing up and being polite, and being eager to learn, and being willing to do what people told me to is incredible. Like, you amalgamate these humans in their head. Like, you sit next to Larry one day and you're at a signing and you ask him a question and he answers that question and you go, oh, okay, and you follow that around and you're like, you're right, it's a long career and you build up over time, and that is one of the ways, and you can't. And then 500 other people that you like, Marv Wolfman I'm friends with, and other humans of note I'm friends with, and they give me advice, and then I do that advice, and then like a year later I'll be like, hey, remember when you told me to go speak at panels? Where I've spoken at 20 panels this year. And they're like, oh, you did the thing that I said? Nobody ever does the thing that I say. And then suddenly they're like, I like you because you do the thing that I told you to do, that I was born. And like, you, not because like it's not an ego thing. It's like you took my advice to heart and you understood that it had value, because I've been doing it a long time and I'm giving the best value that I can back to you. And so the best advice, though, just if you keep doing it and you keep trying to get better, you don't keep trying to do the same thing over and over, but you keep growing and you keep living different lives every year. Like you almost can't not be successful. The people that are not successful are the ones that write the same book for 20 years and they never show it to anybody, and they never do number 2 or number 3 or number 4. They never iterate. There's one of my favorite proverbs, maybe not proverbs, my favorite stories is about the 2 college professors who are going for the same tenure track job. Have you ever heard that one? No. So there's 2 college professors. One's been doing it 2 years, and one's been doing it 10 years. And they both interviewed, and the one who got the job was the one who'd been doing it 2 years. And the guy who'd been doing it 10 years was furious, as you would do. And he went to the dean and he said, why would you give me this person, the job over me? I've been doing this for 8 more years. He said, yes, you've been living the same year over and over again for 10 years. So you've really been living 1 year 10 times. This other person has grown and changed, so he's lived 2 years, but he's lived more than you in those 2 years. And I feel like maybe you don't do it to the level that I do, where I basically like burn my entire company to the ground and build it back up every year. And like next year I'm going I'm going all in on novels and really not doing much graphic novels. But that
still fits.
Yeah, but it allows you to iterate the things that worked. And again, doing the things like mystery is not my genre. Like I love certain parts of the mystery genre, but doing that mystery is a book that still sells for me if I bring it onto a table. But it moved my brain in a way that like made me a better writer. Reading things that I don't think I will like I read a not insignificant amount of romance books. I mean, for me, like, so people would think I would never read a romance book. But, like, I read maybe, like, 5 or 10 a year. Sure. I tend not to read the super erotic books. But, like, I tend to read them because it is a thing I am not good at. And if I read those things, I'm going to improve my writing process. As opposed to if I continue to read the same Chuck Palahniuk books. They're great. I love Chuck Palahniuk books. I love I love all sorts of novels, and I like to go back to them and like be like, oh, this is a retreat into my comfort zone. Mm-hmm. But pushing out of the comfort zone, whether it's in writing or reading or going to new shows or meeting new people or just learning how the world works differently, like those are the things that make you a better writer. That and finishing projects and moving on and understanding that your first stuff is going to suck, and there's a pretty good chance your 50th thing is going to suck on something. At some point, you're going to get to the point of a script and be like, I can't go on. I've never written a script that at some point I wasn't like, I just am a failure. I just can't ever do this. And then you go back and you're like, oh, yeah. I just really had to change this 2 paragraphs, and now it like works. Like functionally, like if I cut out this 1,000 words, it now functionally works as a thing where I thought it was horrible before.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yes. I had one more question before I guess I should open it up to questions because I've been asking questions all night, and so if anyone has questions for Russell, we can have a few minutes here.
Just wanted to say, you sounded like you were quoting Stephen Barnes.
Yeah.
Stephen Barnes is a martial arts expert in all the forms except the women's forms. Mm-hmm. And he can steer you to the right teachers for that.
Right.
Steve was talking about a form he calls pushing hands, and I've forgotten the real name. Mm-hmm. He talks about trying out his skills at pushing hands with a guy who's been training for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And then to test the guy out, he changes the rules a little. Right. And the guy couldn't keep up with it. Mm-hmm. And Steve realized that the guy hasn't had 20 years of pushing hands.
Right.
He's had 1 year of pushing hands 20 times.
Right. Yeah, it's
awesome.
I also love that you brought that up because I do know that story also, but it's so important to not just get your advice from other people who are doing the same thing. Like I listen to a lot of podcasts, I read a lot of books of people who have nothing to do with books, who have nothing to do with writing, but have everything to do with being successful at martial arts or entrepreneurship or. I mean, this book, the Sell Your Soul book, is the basically amalgamation of taking all of this other advice and making it work for creativity. So I love that story. I remember it. I'm gonna have to remember it because it's another good one to show the same point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. Any other questions for Russell? It's just interesting because we have talked with a lot of people, Stephen Barnes, Larry Niven included here, and your route is you do this full time, which not many people currently can do, and it really pushes you to constantly think about what you're doing and kind of survive. But it's a new way of what we have to go through as publishers. You kind of have to figure out a business as well instead of a traditional publishing thing. Larry, you had said you don't know some of the things that people today have to go through because you didn't see that necessarily when you were writing.
I was a grand old man after 5 years of writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the beauties of, so one of the horrors of now is that, like, you have to, there's a million books, like literally a million books that come out a year, like it's literally like a million books plus a year. But the beauty of where we live is you have direct connection to the human who is buying your book. Like, you can communicate with them in a way that you just couldn't before, because they can friend you on social media and join your mailing list, and they can find you at a show, and there are way more shows than there are before. There are just so more routes to find people that, I mean, I love where we are in the world as being a writer now, because if this was even 10 years ago, I literally would not have a career, because nobody has ever, well, very few people have ever hired me, and certainly not at any sort of wage that is sustainable to make these things. Like, no matter how many times I've gone to a publisher, or even now, I'm like, hey, so this book has sold many thousands of copies. Like, do you want to like publish it in softcover? They're like, nah, I don't think it'll work in softcover. And I'm like, it's fine. I mean, whatever. I like, even now with like the proof in the, they're like, yeah, well, that works when you're sitting at a booth, but it's never gonna work if like we publish it. And I'm like,
you'll get there.
So well, maybe, or maybe I won't. I don't know. But
you're profitable.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that, like, between Kickstarter and indie publishing and doing shows and all of these things, like, people who are deserving of being looked at by fans, write things that are good enough for fans to read, can now find those fans, even if other people don't necessarily see the value of publishing it traditionally. It's so upsetting when I talk to writers and they go, well, all I have to do is get my book good enough and then it will be published. I'm like, I make books that are as good as any book on the market. That does not mean anything. That is the barrier for entry. The barrier for entry is that you have to be good enough to compete with Stephen King and all of these other people, and Larry Niven and J.K. Rowling. It has to be good enough whether you do traditional or indie. However, if you can do that, and the traditional publishing route maybe does not open to you, there is the ability, which is very hard. I cannot tell you, it's just so hard. It's just so hard, y'all. But it's also making a deeper connection with your fans and realizing that you don't need as many fans to make as much money as somebody who is traditionally published. It just means you have to be way, way scrappier.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to end. So thank you so much, Russell, for coming out. It's been great.
Thank you.
I do want to plug his Kickstarter is going for Cthulhu. It's hard to spell, so back him. Get this.
It's 100% really done. Yeah. So here, I'll do it this way. It's 100% done. So like now it's actually going to be funded. It will be in hardcover, just like this.
It's real.
It's a real thing now. This is a real thing.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.